Undercover black CEO told to wait outside by car dealership staff. Minutes later, they all fired. The morning sun was warm, and the city streets were already alive with the sound of honking cars and rushing footsteps. People moved quickly, each busy with their own plans, while a tall man in a plain shirt and worn jeans stepped out of a taxi. He looked ordinary, blending into the crowd so well that nobody would guess he was one of the most powerful business leaders in the region. His name was Marcus Johnson, a man who had built a large company with thousands of employees under his leadership. But today, Marcus didn't come to the dealership to show off his wealth. He had come quietly, with only one thought in mind: buying a surprise car for his daughter's graduation. His daughter had worked hard, finishing her degree with excellent grades. She had sacrificed many weekends, stayed up late into the night, and balanced school with part-time jobs. Marcus had promised himself that when she graduated, he would give her a gift that showed just how proud he was. A luxury car, something reliable yet stylish, seemed perfect. But Marcus wanted the process to feel personal, not like another business deal. That was why he left his suit and tie behind, choosing instead a casual look. No driver, no assistants, no expensive watch on his wrist, just him, walking into the dealership like any regular customer. As he approached the tall glass doors of the showroom, Marcus noticed how polished everything looked. The dealership had marble floors that reflected the sunlight, cars that shined as if they had been washed every hour, and staff standing around in neat uniforms. The scent of fresh leather filled the air the moment he walked in. To Marcus, this was just another shop, but he knew it was a place where appearances mattered. He walked in calmly, expecting to be greeted like any customer. At first, nobody said anything. A few salespeople glanced at him and then quickly looked away. One of them straightened his tie and hurried toward a couple dressed in suits. Another walked past Marcus without a word, smiling instead at a young man wearing designer clothes. Marcus didn't take it personally. He thought maybe they were busy. So, he walked slowly around the showroom, admiring the cars on display. He paused by a sleek black sedan, running his hand gently across the hood. He imagined his daughter's smile when she would see it parked in the driveway with a ribbon tied on top. Just then, one of the salesmen finally walked over, but his tone was far from welcoming. "Sir," the man said with a forced smile, "we're a little busy right now. Could you maybe wait outside until someone is free to help you?" Marcus looked at him, surprised. He glanced around the room. Half the sales staff were standing idle, talking to each other or scrolling through their phones. Busy? That was clearly not the case. Still, Marcus stayed calm. He nodded politely and replied, "That's fine. I can wait." The salesman gave a quick nod and walked away, heading straight toward another customer who had just walked in wearing a gold watch and polished shoes. Marcus stepped aside, quietly moving closer to the window. He stood near the entrance, watching the activity around him. From his spot, he noticed things more clearly now. Customers who looked wealthy were being welcomed with smiles, handshakes, and even cups of coffee. Those who looked simple or modest received little attention, just like him. As Marcus waited, he overheard bits of conversations that stung. Two salesmen whispered to each other, laughing softly. "He probably just came in to look around. Doubt he can afford anything here," one of them said. The other chuckled in agreement, glancing at Marcus with a smirk. Marcus kept his face steady, showing no anger. He had been in boardrooms where people underestimated him before. He had seen investors judge him by the color of his skin before they knew his name. It wasn't new to him. But still, it amazed him how quickly people assumed things without even asking. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, letting the minutes pass. A couple walked in, clearly new customers. The staff hurried to greet them, offering brochures and talking with enthusiasm. Marcus was invisible to them. He folded his arms and leaned against the wall, patient as always. Deep down, he knew this moment was revealing something important, not about him, but about them. As more time passed, Marcus thought back to his daughter. He pictured her joy when she finally received the keys. That thought kept him steady. He was not here to prove himself to strangers. He was here for her. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore what was happening. The way the staff treated him said more about their character than his. Minutes stretched into nearly half an hour. Marcus had been in the dealership all that time, and not a single person had offered him proper assistance. A few glanced at him occasionally, but their eyes carried judgment, not respect. Some even looked annoyed that he was still there. The irony made Marcus smile faintly to himself. Here he was, a man who had signed deals worth millions, standing quietly in a corner while being dismissed like he was invisible. He thought about how his employees back at the office treated clients. He had always taught them one principle: every person deserves respect, no matter who they are or how they look. That principle had helped his company grow. Respect built trust, and trust built success. Watching this dealership's behavior only reminded him how far some businesses still had to go. A young woman working as a receptionist glanced at Marcus. She looked uncertain, as if she wanted to help but was too nervous to go against the unspoken culture of the showroom. She quickly looked away when one of the senior salesmen walked past. Marcus noticed this small detail. It told him that even those who wanted to do the right thing were being silenced by the environment around them. Finally, Marcus let out a soft sigh. He had seen enough. He had given them more than enough time to show common courtesy. Instead, they had made him wait, mocked him behind his back, and treated him as though he didn't belong. What they didn't know was that this ordinary-looking man was about to change their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. With calm steps, Marcus moved away from the entrance and walked deeper into the showroom. He approached a desk where a manager sat, flipping through papers. The manager looked up, his expression carrying the same dismissive air as the others. "Yes? Can I help you?" the manager asked, his tone flat and impatient. Marcus gave a small smile, his voice steady and polite. "Yes," he said. "I would like to speak with the person in charge." The manager frowned slightly, as though the request annoyed him. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Well, I'm the manager here. What is it you need?" At that moment, Marcus realized he had just reached the turning point of the day. He had stayed quiet long enough, watched carefully long enough, and allowed them to show who they really were. The next step would no longer be about waiting. It would be about revealing the truth. And though he hadn't spoken a word of anger yet, everything he had observed was about to matter more than they could ever imagine. Marcus stood quietly, his calm expression hiding the disappointment he felt inside. He had already been asked to wait outside, ignored while others were treated with respect, and whispered about as if he didn't belong in the showroom. He had watched the way people judged him by his simple clothes and quiet presence, and though he kept his composure, the behavior of the staff was becoming clearer with every passing minute. From his spot near the manager's desk, Marcus could still hear bits of conversation from the sales staff. Two young employees leaned against a polished car, talking as though the showroom was their private lounge. One of them laughed softly and muttered, "Man, look at him still hanging around. Doesn't he realize these cars aren't for everyone?" The other smirked, adding, "He'll probably ask about prices and then walk out when he hears the numbers. Seen it before." Marcus kept his eyes steady, not letting their words reach his pride. He was used to hearing people underestimate him. It wasn't the first time people assumed he couldn't afford something, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But what struck him most was not their laughter, it was the comfort with which they spoke. They felt free to dismiss him, as though they were confident no one would correct them. That told him something about the culture of the dealership. Respect was only shown to those who looked the part. As Marcus waited, he noticed how the salespeople transformed when dealing with others. A man in a tailored suit entered, and instantly 3 staff members rushed to greet him. One opened the door, another offered him a handshake, and the third began speaking excitedly about the dealership's special offers. The contrast was sharp. Marcus had been waiting for half an hour, yet no one had shown him even a fraction of that enthusiasm. Another family walked in, a young couple with 2 children. Their clothes were neat but simple, not designer or expensive. Immediately, Marcus noticed how the staff treated them too polite but distant, as though they didn't expect the family to make a purchase. They were handed a brochure but then left alone to wander without guidance. Marcus realized he wasn't the only one being judged unfairly. Anyone who didn't look wealthy was invisible to the staff. He folded his arms, thinking about how this reflected on leadership. He knew from his own experience that a team's behavior was often a mirror of how it was led. If the sales team felt free to act this way, then their manager likely encouraged it or at least allowed it. That thought gave Marcus a sense of clarity. He wasn't just seeing bad manners from a few employees. He was witnessing a broken system. The receptionist, the same young woman who had looked at him earlier with hesitation, gave him another glance. For a second, her eyes seemed to carry sympathy, as though she wanted to say something. But the moment one of the senior salesmen walked by, she quickly looked down at her desk, pretending to type. Marcus noticed her small struggle. He realized that even those who might want to treat customers with kindness felt pressure to follow the unspoken rules of the place. Time ticked on, and Marcus remained patient. He walked slowly to another car, this time a silver SUV, and studied it closely. He imagined how comfortable it would be for family trips, how safe it would be for his daughter to drive. He ran his hand along the door handle, but once again no one approached him. Instead, 2 salespeople near the corner snickered, one whispering, "He looks like he's dreaming." Marcus straightened his back and looked around the room with calm, steady eyes. He didn't need to respond. He didn't need to argue. His silence spoke louder than anything he could have said. He was giving them a chance to show their character, and they were failing it one by one. A few more minutes passed, and Marcus finally decided to test the waters. He approached one of the salesmen who had been avoiding him earlier. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely. "Could you tell me more about this model here?" He pointed to the sleek black sedan he had admired earlier. The salesman glanced at him, barely hiding his annoyance. "That car starts at a pretty high price," he said, his tone flat. "It's not exactly budget-friendly. Maybe you'd like to look at something more affordable." His eyes darted toward a corner where older, less popular models were parked. Marcus felt a sharp pang inside, not because of the words but because of the certainty with which they were spoken. The man hadn't asked about Marcus's budget, hadn't asked what he was looking for, hadn't even given him basic information. He had jumped straight to assumptions. Still, Marcus kept his voice calm. "I'd still like to know more about this one," he said. The salesman sighed and gave a quick explanation, barely scratching the surface. He didn't offer a brochure, didn't mention financing options, didn't suggest a test drive. After less than a minute, he excused himself and walked away, heading straight to greet another customer who had just walked in wearing polished shoes. Marcus remained by the car, thoughtful and observant. The situation reminded him of his early career. Years ago, when Marcus had been a young professional trying to pitch his ideas, he had been dismissed in similar ways. Investors ignored him until he proved himself with undeniable results. Back then, he had promised himself that if he ever became a leader, he would never treat anyone as less than. That promise had shaped his company, and today it was being tested in a very different setting. As Marcus stood there, more fragments of conversation reached his ears. A senior salesman joked with another, saying, "Sometimes I wonder why people like that even walk in here. They know they can't buy anything." The words carried a sharp sting, not because Marcus cared about their opinion of him, but because he knew they would speak the same way about others who genuinely came with hope of buying their first good car. How many people had walked out of this dealership feeling humiliated? How many had been denied respect because of careless assumptions? Marcus thought about his daughter again, her hard-working spirit, her bright future. He thought about the values he had taught her, never to judge people by appearance, always to treat others with dignity. Standing in that showroom, he realized that this day wasn't just about buying her a car. It was also about living out those values in front of people who had forgotten them. After nearly an hour, Marcus had seen enough. The whispers, the laughter, the dismissive comments, all of it had painted a clear picture. These employees had no idea who he was, and that was fine. But they had shown their true selves, and soon, those choices would carry consequences. Marcus remained outwardly calm, but inside, a decision was forming. He would no longer simply observe. It was time to act. He turned back toward the manager's desk, his footsteps steady and purposeful. The manager looked up again, this time with a hint of impatience. "Yes," he said, as though Marcus was interrupting something important. Marcus met his eyes, his voice even and polite. "I would like to speak with the person in charge," he repeated. The manager leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "As I said, I'm the manager. If you have questions, you can ask me." Marcus gave a small smile, but his eyes held a quiet strength. The patience of the last hour had led to this moment. He had heard their words, seen their actions, and allowed them every chance to correct themselves. Now, the story was about to change. Marcus stood before the manager's desk, his calmness unshaken. For over an hour, he had been dismissed, mocked, and brushed aside, and now the manager's impatience only added to the weight of the situation. The man leaned back in his chair as though Marcus's request for help was an interruption to his day. His arms were folded, his tone sharp. "I told you, I'm the manager. If you've got questions, you can ask me." Marcus gave a faint smile, the kind that revealed nothing of the thoughts running through his mind. His eyes, however, stayed steady, carrying a quiet authority. "That's good to know," he said slowly. "But I think I'll need to speak to someone above you." The manager raised his eyebrows, clearly irritated. "Above me? Sir, with all due respect, you're in a dealership, not a corporate office. If you want information about a car, I can give it to you. If you want something else, then maybe this isn't the right place for you." His tone dripped with condescension, as though Marcus had asked for something unreasonable. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. He glanced around the room at the shining cars, the sales staff laughing in corners, and the receptionist staring nervously down at her keyboard. He thought about the lessons he had learned in life, the countless times he had been underestimated. Then, without raising his voice, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The simple act of taking out the phone didn't seem important to anyone in the showroom. To them, it looked like an ordinary man making an ordinary call. But Marcus knew what this single call meant. It was the bridge between the world they thought he belonged to and the reality of who he was. He scrolled through his contacts, selected a number, and pressed it. The line rang once before someone picked up. "Hello, this is Marcus Johnson," he said politely. "I'm at one of your dealerships right now, and I think you might want to come down here immediately." "Yes. I'll wait." His voice carried the same calmness he had held all morning, but his words carried weight. The receptionist looked up, curious. A couple of salesmen nearby turned their heads, sensing something unusual in his tone. Still, none of them understood the storm that was quietly building. The manager gave a small laugh, shaking his head. "Look, sir, if you think calling someone is going to get you special treatment, that's not how we work here." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You might want to try another dealership if you're serious about buying." We don't exactly have time to waste. Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket, ignoring the man's remark. Instead, he walked back toward the sleek black sedan he had admired earlier. He ran his hand along the polished hood once again, calm and thoughtful. He wasn't angry, he didn't need to be. Anger was wasted energy. He had learned long ago that patience and truth had far more power. Minutes passed, and the staff returned to their routine. The salesman left, the manager tapped on his keyboard, and customers continued to walk in and out. Marcus remained quiet, waiting. He knew it wouldn't take long. Sure enough, within 15 minutes, the glass doors at the entrance swung open. A group of sharply dressed men and women walked in, their presence immediately commanding the room. They weren't ordinary customers, their confident strides and the way they carried themselves made that clear. The chatter in the showroom died down instantly. Every eye turned toward them. The manager looked up, his face brightening. He assumed these were important clients, perhaps investors or buyers. He stood up quickly, straightening his tie. "Welcome, welcome," he said eagerly. "How can we help you today?" But the group didn't look at him. Their eyes went straight to Marcus, who stood calmly by the black sedan. A tall man in a gray suit stepped forward, his expression serious. "Mr. Johnson," he said respectfully, extending a hand. "We came as soon as we received your call." The silence in the room was heavy. The sales staff froze, staring in disbelief. The receptionist's eyes widened. The manager's smile faded as confusion spread across his face. He turned slowly toward Marcus, his jaw tightening as realization began to dawn. Marcus shook the tall man's hand with the same calm grace he had carried all morning. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said. "I thought it might be better for you to see this place with your own eyes." The tall man nodded, his face grim. "We'll take care of it." He turned toward the rest of the group, giving them a signal. They spread out across the showroom, their sharp eyes observing everything: the idle staff, the dismissive expressions, the lack of attention toward certain customers. The manager finally spoke, his voice shaky. "Wait, what's going on here? Who exactly are you?" Marcus turned his head slowly, meeting the manager's eyes. He didn't raise his voice, didn't show anger. Instead, his tone was calm and measured, carrying a quiet strength that needed no force. "You've been speaking to me for over an hour, and yet you never thought to ask who I am. Maybe it's time you found out." The manager blinked, his throat tightening. Who are you?" he asked again. Marcus gave the faintest of smiles. "I'm Marcus Johnson, CEO of Johnson Enterprises. One of the companies that partners with your parent corporation. I've signed contracts worth more than the value of every car in this showroom combined." The room fell silent. The weight of his words settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. The sales staff looked at each other in shock. The receptionist covered her mouth with her hand. The manager's face drained of color, his earlier arrogance crumbling into nervous silence. Marcus let the moment hang in the air. He wanted them to feel it, to truly understand the mistake they had made. Then he added, still calm, "And I came here today to buy a car for my daughter. Nothing more. But instead of being treated like a customer, I was treated like I didn't belong here. That's what you chose to show me." The tall man in the gray suit stepped forward again, addressing the manager directly. "Do you understand what this means? Do you realize who you've just dismissed and disrespected?" His tone was sharp, carrying authority. The manager stammered, his voice breaking. I didn't know. I thought," he glanced at Marcus, desperation in his eyes. "Sir, please, it was a misunderstanding." Marcus shook his head slowly. "No. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. Every word, every look, every laugh, it was all a choice. And choices have consequences." The tall man turned to Marcus, his expression serious. "We'll handle this, Mr. Johnson. You don't need to say another word." Marcus nodded. He had no desire to humiliate anyone further. He had said enough, and the truth was now clear to everyone in the room. The staff who had ignored him stood frozen, their faces pale, realizing that the ordinary man they had dismissed held more power than they could have imagined. As the executives moved through the showroom, speaking to employees, the atmosphere shifted completely. The once busy chatter was gone, replaced by a heavy silence. Customers watched with curiosity, whispering to one another, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. Marcus stood quietly by the car, his presence steady and unshaken. He had not shouted, he had not argued, but he had revealed the truth in a way that none of them would forget. The simple call he had made, the quiet patience he had shown, all of it had led to this turning point. And though the staff did not know it yet, this was only the beginning. The room was so quiet that the sound of a car engine outside could be heard faintly through the glass doors. The staff who had been laughing earlier now stood frozen, their faces pale and stiff. The manager, once so full of authority, now looked small behind his desk. He kept shifting uncomfortably, as if the ground beneath him had given way. Customers who had been browsing stopped to watch, sensing that they were witnessing something unusual. Marcus remained calm, standing near the black sedan he had admired before. He didn't need to move or raise his voice. His presence alone carried weight. The executives who had arrived began speaking quietly among themselves, their eyes sweeping across the showroom. Each glance they exchanged told a story. This was not going to end well for the staff who had forgotten what respect meant. One of the executives, a woman in a navy blue suit with sharp eyes, walked over to the receptionist first. She asked in a gentle but firm tone, "Has this gentleman been here long?" The receptionist hesitated, glancing nervously at Marcus, then back at the woman. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, ma'am. He has been here for over an hour. No one helped him." Her voice trembled as though she feared saying the truth, but honesty won out. The woman gave a slow nod, her face tightening. She turned to the others and said, "That's all we need to know." The tall man in the gray suit, clearly the senior-most among them, stepped closer to the manager's desk. His voice was calm but carried a cutting edge. "Do you realize who you've been dismissing? Do you understand what this means for your position here?" The manager swallowed hard. His earlier arrogance had vanished completely. He raised his hand slightly, as if to shield himself from the weight of the words. I didn't know. I thought he was just," his voice trailed off. He couldn't even finish the sentence, because the truth was clear. He had made an assumption based on appearance, and now it had come back to haunt him. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "It was never about not knowing. It was about not caring enough to treat every person with dignity. That's what I've seen here today." His words carried no anger, just quiet truth. The tall man in the gray suit turned to the staff who had been whispering earlier. "You two," he said sharply, pointing toward them. "Step forward." The young salesman hesitated, but with trembling steps, they moved closer. Their faces were pale, their confidence gone. "Tell me," the executive asked, "did you mock this gentleman while he stood here waiting?" Neither of them spoke at first. Their eyes darted to Marcus, then to the manager, then to the floor. Finally, one of them muttered, We didn't mean anything by it." The executive's voice grew sharper. "That's not an answer. Did you mock him or not?" The second salesman nodded faintly, shame filling his face. "Yes, sir." The silence that followed was heavy. Customers in the room shook their heads in disbelief. The receptionist lowered her eyes, unable to watch. The executive turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Johnson, we will take immediate action. This is not only unprofessional, it is unacceptable in every way." Marcus gave a small nod. I don't need apologies. What matters is whether you change what happens in places like this. His voice was steady, carrying wisdom more than anger. The executives huddled briefly, speaking in low voices. Within minutes, the decision was clear. The tall man straightened, his eyes sweeping over the staff. Effective immediately, he said firmly, the individuals responsible for this behavior are dismissed. This includes the sales staff who mocked Mr. Johnson and the manager who allowed such a culture to exist in the first place. The words landed like thunder in the quiet room. The salesmen gasped, their mouths falling open. The manager shook his head quickly, his face turning red. You can't please, give me a chance to explain, he pleaded. His voice cracked with desperation. But the executive's face was unmoved. We don't need explanations. We've seen enough. This dealership represents more than just cars, it represents our brand. And today, you've shown us exactly what kind of brand you've been running. That ends now. The receptionist covered her mouth again, stunned. Customers whispered to one another, some even nodding in approval. They had seen what Marcus had endured, and now they were seeing justice unfold before their eyes. The manager tried once more, his voice trembling. Sir, please, I have a family. I've been here for years. Marcus looked at him, his expression calm but firm. I have a family too. And so do the many people you've dismissed, judged, and disrespected simply because of how they looked when they walked through those doors. If you had treated me with basic courtesy, none of this would be happening. But you chose otherwise. The manager's shoulders slumped. He looked down at the floor, his fight gone. The salesmen beside him stood frozen, their faces pale with regret. The executive gave a nod to one of the assistants who had come with him. Escort them out. The instruction was simple, but its impact was enormous. Slowly, the dismissed staff were led toward the doors. No one clapped, no one cheered. It wasn't a moment of celebration. It was a moment of lesson, heavy and unforgettable. When the doors closed behind them, the room felt lighter but also more serious. The executives turned back toward Marcus, their expressions filled with respect. Mr. Johnson, the tall man said, we cannot apologize enough for what you experienced today. This dealership will undergo immediate restructuring. And I assure you, nothing like this will happen again. Marcus gave a small nod, his eyes thoughtful. Change doesn't come from words, it comes from action. I hope you mean what you say. The tall man placed a hand over his chest. We do. And we will prove it. For the first time, Marcus allowed a faint smile to touch his lips. He looked around at the customers who were still watching, their eyes wide with awe. Some of them nodded at him with quiet admiration. He could feel the weight of the lesson that had just unfolded, not just for the staff, but for everyone present. He turned back toward the black sedan once more. Its polished surface reflected his calm face. Now, he said softly, almost to himself, let's get back to the reason I came here. The executives looked at each other, understanding. One of them quickly approached him. Of course, sir. Please allow me to personally walk you through every detail of the car you're interested in. The atmosphere in the room had completely changed. The same man who had been ignored, mocked, and dismissed was now being treated with the respect he deserved all along. But Marcus didn't let the sudden shift of behavior impress him. He knew respect given only when someone recognizes power is not true respect. True respect is shown when nothing is known about a person, when they are treated with dignity simply because they are human. Still, he decided to proceed. His daughter's gift was waiting, and this moment had already given him more than enough to reflect on. As the executives guided him through the details of the car, Marcus kept his tone calm, asking questions politely. The staff who remained stood quietly in the background, their eyes lowered, knowing they had been given a lesson they would never forget. By the time Marcus finished reviewing the car, The tension in the room had softened slightly, though the weight of what had happened still lingered. The receptionist, gathering courage, finally approached him. "Sir," she said quietly, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how you were treated. I wanted to help earlier but," she hesitated, her voice small. Marcus looked at her kindly. "I saw that. Sometimes the hardest thing is to do the right thing when everyone else is doing the wrong thing. Don't lose that instinct. It matters." Her eyes brightened faintly, and she gave a small nod. As Marcus prepared to finalize his choice, he glanced once more toward the doors where the dismissed staff had exited. He didn't feel satisfaction in their downfall. What he felt was a hope that this lesson would ripple outward, reminding everyone that arrogance and judgment always carry a cost. The black sedan gleamed under the showroom lights, ready to become the symbol of something greater. For Marcus, it was not only a gift for his daughter, it was proof that patience, dignity, and truth would always stand taller than pride and assumption. The tension inside the dealership had softened, though it still hung in the air like the last echo of a storm. The dismissed staff were gone, escorted out quietly but firmly, and the executives remained, hovering near Marcus with a respect that hadn't been there before. Customers still lingered, some pretending to look at cars but really watching Marcus, whispering to each other about what they had just witnessed. The entire showroom had been transformed into a stage, and Marcus had become the unintentional lead of a story none of them would forget. Marcus stood beside the sleek black sedan, the car he had admired from the very beginning. The polished paint reflected the bright lights of the showroom and even his own steady face. He thought about how his daughter's eyes would widen with joy when she saw it parked in front of their home, wrapped with a ribbon. That image gave him peace, reminding him of the real reason he had come here. One of the executives stepped closer, holding a folder of documents. "Mr. Johnson, everything has been prepared for you," he said with practiced politeness. "We'll personally handle the paperwork and ensure the process is smooth." His tone carried both respect and urgency, as if he wanted to erase the damage that had already been done. Marcus nodded politely but did not rush. He walked around the car slowly, running his hand across the hood, then opening the door to glance inside. The soft leather seats and shining dashboard greeted him. He sat inside for a moment, adjusting the steering wheel and taking in the faint scent of new leather. A small smile touched his lips. It was perfect not for him, but for the young woman who had worked tirelessly to make her father proud. He stepped out again, closing the door gently. His calm voice broke the silence. "I'll take this one," he said simply. The executives exchanged relieved glances, almost as though a heavy weight had been lifted from their shoulders. They rushed to finalize the purchase, eager to make up for what had happened earlier. But Marcus, though cooperative, remained composed. He wasn't here to see them scramble for his approval. He was here to teach a lesson without ever needing to lecture. As the paperwork was brought to him, Marcus signed each document carefully. The receptionist, still seated at her desk, watched with quiet admiration. The customers nearby leaned closer, some shaking their heads in disbelief. For them, it was more than just a man buying a car. It was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving and that true strength often hid behind the simplest clothes. When the deal was completed, one of the executives handed Marcus the keys with both hands, as though offering something sacred. "On behalf of our company, sir, we are truly sorry for everything you experienced today," he said sincerely. "We will ensure that respect, not assumption, becomes the foundation of this place moving forward." Marcus took the keys but held the man's gaze for a moment. "Change only matters if it lasts," he said quietly. "If what happened here today makes even one person stop and think before judging someone else, then perhaps it was worth the wait." His words struck deeply. The executive nodded slowly, understanding that this wasn't just about a car, it was about something larger. Marcus turned to leave, but before he stepped out, he paused near the receptionist's desk. The young woman looked up, her face nervous but hopeful. Marcus smiled at her warmly. "Thank you for at least wanting to help," he said gently. "Never be afraid to do what's right, even if it feels small. It makes more difference than you know." Her eyes brightened, and she nodded quickly, her heart lightened by his encouragement. Outside, the afternoon sun had grown brighter. Marcus walked calmly toward the lot where his new car would be prepared. Customers who had witnessed the scene followed him with their eyes, still stunned by the quiet dignity he had carried throughout the ordeal. Some whispered to each other about his identity, others about the powerful lesson they had just seen. For many, it would be a story they repeated to friends and family for years. As Marcus reached the car, an assistant hurried to place a temporary ribbon across the hood, a small gesture of apology. Marcus allowed it, though his heart was already filled with the image of his daughter's smile when she saw it later. He opened the driver's door, slipped inside, and for a moment sat in silence. He thought about the journey of the day, the dismissal, the mocking laughter, the phone call, and the reveal. He thought about the employees who had walked out with regret written across their faces. He thought about the customers who had seen arrogance crumble before truth. And he thought about his daughter, who would soon sit where he was sitting, her hands on the steering wheel, her future wide open before her. Starting the engine, Marcus listened to the smooth hum of the car. It felt strong, reliable, just as he had hoped. But what gave him more satisfaction than the car itself was the knowledge that he had turned a painful situation into a moment of clarity, not just for the dealership, but for everyone who had been present. Driving slowly out of the lot, Marcus kept his eyes steady on the road ahead. He didn't look back. There was no need. Behind him, the dealership would never be the same. The executives would hold meetings, rules would be rewritten, training would be enforced. And though he hadn't raised his voice, though he hadn't demanded respect, his quiet presence had shifted an entire culture. The city streets stretched before him, busy with life as always. People crossed sidewalks, buses rolled by, children laughed in parks. To them, Marcus was just another man driving a new car. They didn't know who he was or what he had just experienced. And Marcus preferred it that way. He didn't need recognition, didn't need applause. He carried his lesson quietly, just as he carried his success. Later that evening, Marcus arrived home. His daughter, wearing her graduation gown and still glowing with pride from the ceremony, came outside when she heard the engine. Her eyes widened as she saw the black sedan rolling into the driveway. Her hands flew to her mouth, her expression filled with disbelief and joy. "Dad, is that, for me?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement. Marcus stepped out of the car, his smile warm and full of love. He held out the keys. "You earned it," he said simply. Her laughter and tears mixed as she ran to hug him tightly. The car gleamed behind them, but in that moment, it wasn't the luxury or the shine that mattered. It was the bond between a father and daughter, the pride of a parent, and the joy of a child who knew she was valued. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, smiling as they watched the scene unfold. To them, it looked like a father surprising his daughter with a graduation gift. They didn't know the full story of what had happened earlier in the day, but Marcus didn't mind. That part of the story wasn't for everyone, it was for the people in that dealership who had needed the lesson most. As the evening sky turned orange, Marcus stood with his daughter beside the car, his arm around her shoulders. She was still staring at the keys in her hand, her smile unending. "This is the best gift I could ever imagine," she whispered. Marcus looked at her softly. "It's not just about the car. It's about knowing your worth. Never let anyone make you feel less because of how you look. Remember today, even if I don't tell you the details. Remember that you deserve respect, always." She nodded, her eyes shining with understanding. The black sedan sat quietly in the driveway, its polished surface reflecting the glow of the setting sun. It was more than a car, it was a symbol. A symbol of patience, of quiet strength, and of the truth that respect is never optional. It is owed to every person, no matter their appearance. And as the day came to a close, Marcus felt at peace. He had given his daughter not just a gift, but a lesson she would carry for life. He had given the dealership a memory that would haunt and guide them for years. And he had given himself a quiet reminder that even in the face of arrogance, dignity would always have the final word.